How did we get here? How did we get 9 parts deep? I feel like we can just say at this point that everything is a scam. Life in general is a scam. Everything is out to get us, everything is out to rip us off and manipulate us and exploit us, and just wrap it up here, put a bow on it, and call it a day. With that said, I have yet another list today of 5 scams that have become so normalized that we don't even notice them anymore, and I have to say that this list is no less juicy than any of the previous 8, and it might even be one of the juicier ones. If for some reason you haven't seen the first 8 installments, I'll put a link to them up top and down below as well. There is a playlist. I know a lot of you guys have said, oh, make a whole playlist, put them in order, make them numbered. It already exists, it's there. So check out the playlist, check out the first 8 episodes, and let's start off this episode with a banger, and that is vaping. It would be very easy for me to spend the next 5 to 10 minutes just dunking on and ripping apart smoking and the whole tobacco industry, but that would be too easy. That's like low-hanging fruit. So instead, let's talk about its evil stepsister, vaping. Vaping was originally invented with the intention that it was to help people wean themselves off of cigarettes and stop smoking, which sounds like a good thing overall. But in an unsurprising twist of events, vaping has become an entire industry of its own. Over the years, we've seen cigarettes decrease in popularity, which is of course a good thing. In fact, I think that the studies are showing that year over year, less and less young people are starting to smoke cigarettes, which is great. However, young people are not staying away from cigarettes just because they know they're bad for their health and they're trying to make healthier choices. They've just replaced them with vaping. The vape industry in America as of 2022 is worth over $18 billion, and it's on track to hit almost $48 billion by the year 2030. In case you're really bad at math, that means that it's growing despite the fact that the number of smokers has decreased significantly.
Lisa! Give me that!
Well, okay, but what part of that makes it a scam, you might be wondering? Well, if the vape industry was initially conceived with the idea of helping people quit smoking, that's a good thing, but it is no longer that. It is now an entire beast of its own, marketing the products to people who otherwise may never have picked up a cigarette in their life under the guise that it is less harmful, that it is healthier than cigarettes, and I'm not so convinced about that. Cigarettes have thousands of chemicals in them, including tar and carcinogens and all sorts of things that are known to cause cancer, and that's not news to anybody at this point. But the idea that vapes just produce a harmless water vapor is bullshit. Vapes contain propylene glycol, along with a whole bunch of other artificial flavors and additives, which you are inhaling directly into your lungs. And I think that the only reason that people are going along with the narrative that it's healthier is simply because we don't yet have the data to know how much damage is actually being caused. I wouldn't be at all surprised if in the next 10 to 20 years we see a huge increase in popcorn lung and all sorts of other respiratory illnesses amongst people who have maybe never touched a cigarette in their life, but who have been long-term vape users.
I can't believe how easy it is in this country to get cigarettes.
And in a way, I would almost argue that that's worse, because everybody knows that cigarettes kill you. That's not news to anybody. And so when people are smoking cigarettes, they are well aware of what they're doing to their bodies. It's not a good thing, but it's a choice that they are making, and they can't plead ignorance. Whereas with vapes, people could just go along believing what they want to believe simply because we don't know yet, and they might actually be causing significantly more harm to themselves than they ever believed was possible. Truthfully, I am far too skeptical to believe that this wasn't the intention of the vaping industry to begin with. There is no long-term money to be made in a product or an industry that is designed to help the user stop using the product. So even if the person who initially conceived the idea had good intentions, there was no chance that this industry was going to escape the grips of capitalism and not become the newest craze and the newest thing to cause black lungs. Not only are vapes being used more by non-smokers than they ever have been by smokers, but the concentration of nicotine in most of them is so much higher than a typical cigarette, and I don't care what anybody says. If something is being made in watermelon or mint chocolate chip or strawberry flavors, you cannot convince me that this wasn't intended to pique the interest of children. And if somehow it isn't bad enough that these flavors are attracting young people who otherwise probably never would have started smoking, and that the nicotine levels are so much higher and that we don't even know how harmful they're going to be in the long run, have you ever been around somebody who's vaping? It's the worst. A lot of the reason that cigarette smoking has declined in popularity is because governments have made it incredibly inconvenient to be a smoker. Cigarette smokers go out on smoke breaks, right? So they go outside for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, they have their cigarette, but vapors don't ever seem to separate themselves from their vapes. They seem to just be vaping all day, every day, because they feel like they don't have to go outside. They're completely oblivious to the fact that they're inhaling nicotine almost 24 hours a day, or at least every hour that they're awake, it seems. I've also personally never met a single vape user who feels the need to go outside or to excuse themselves from a group, as though they think that it's just completely benign and harmless and non-offensive, and I beg to differ. All of that water vapor that contains the propylene glycol and the high levels of nicotine and all the artificial chemicals and all the crap and who knows what inside of it, When you're vaping, all of that water vapor has to land somewhere. And if you're in your house, that vapor residue is landing on your furniture, it's landing on your floors, it's landing on your body, your clothing, your kids, your pets. Your kids and your pets are walking through it. They're licking their hands, they're licking their paws, they're ingesting high levels of nicotine that maybe you'd be a little bit more conscientious about if it was an actual cigarette, but it's just water vapor, right? Bullshit. There are a few reasons why I continue to make these videos highlighting these scams that we encounter in everyday life. For one thing, to be totally honest, I just think that it's a lot of fun to talk shit. I think I'm kind of good at it. You guys seem to enjoy watching it as well, and it's just a lot of fun for me. But beyond that, I just think that it's really important to bring light to these topics, to talk about the things that are designed to exploit us and manipulate us and rip us off and take advantage of us, and there are so many of them. And I think that awareness is the first step in overcoming them. But in some cases, awareness simply just isn't enough, and that's why I'm so grateful for today's sponsor, Aura, who has made it their mission to keep us all safe from spammers and scammers online. Did you know that data brokers collect and sell your personal information to basically anyone who's willing to buy it? That means your full name, your full address, your health record, your family tree, everything. It's basically just all out there in the open, leaving you vulnerable to things like having your bank accounts or your social media accounts hacked, or even having your identity stolen. Data brokers are also to thank for the numerous spam calls and spam emails that we all get harassing us each and every week. But Aura does the hard work for you, constantly scanning the internet and notifying you which brokers have access to your information, and then submitting opt-out requests on your behalf so that your private information stays private. Not only that, but Aura also comes stocked with a whole bunch of other features designed to help keep you safe online. Things like antivirus, VPN, password management, identity theft insurance, and more, all in one convenient app and all at one affordable price, so you don't need anything else. I very much value my privacy, and I know that you guys value yours as well. So to get started with a free 2-week trial, head over to aura.com/accordingtonicole or click the link in the description box down below. Thank you again to Aura for sponsoring today's video. All right, the next scam we're going to talk about is one that is very, very high up on the bullshit thermometer. In fact, I think that there are some things that are a little bit on the bullshit thermometer, they're kind of bullshitty, and then there's some things that are completely at the top of the bullshit thermometer, and let me tell you, this next one is off the charts, and that is carbon offsets. What is a carbon offset, you might be asking?
It's like a get-out-of-jail-free card for people concerned about the environment, but not concerned enough to actually do anything.
Carbon offsets are the epitome of virtue signaling and armchair activism and non-action. So for example, let's say a celebrity has a private jet and they fly all around the world, and they know that that's going to make them look really bad. It's going to look like they don't care about the environment because they're being so wasteful and so polluting. Well, instead of actually changing their lifestyle and finding a more efficient way to travel, they'll just go buy some carbon offsets. Carbon offsets can be things like trees that get planted, it can be things like investing in a windmill company, basically making a financial donation to try to do something that is good for the environment to make up for the fact that you're destroying the environment.
That's ridiculous. You can't cause a problem and ask someone else to fix it. You have to do the work yourself.
Pretty much everything we do produces carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide in mass quantities is obviously pretty bad for the environment and is largely responsible for climate change. But rather than being able to look inwards and have some accountability and recognize that certain people or certain industries or certain businesses are largely responsible for the vast majority of that pollution, all they have to do is buy some carbon offsets and pretend it never happened. And if you are more of an optimist than I am, you might be thinking, well, it's not an ideal situation, but it's better than nothing, right? And I completely disagree. In fact, I think it is significantly worse than nothing. When a corporation or a person believes that buying carbon offsets, that paying for some trees to be planted, for example, relieves them of accountability, relieves them of personal responsibility, they're a lot less likely to have any consideration at all. They can now do whatever they want. It's like a get out of jail free pass because all they have to do is just buy some carbon offsets when they're done. Want to dump some oil in the ocean? Have fun. Want to plow down an entire forest? Go for it. Want to travel in loops on your personal jet for no reason whatsoever just because you have nothing better to do with your time? Have at it. We can just buy some carbon offsets when we're done and it's like it never happened. And it's bullshit. Imagine walking down the street and every time you saw somebody out walking their dog, you ran up to them and kicked the dog in the face. But then you just donated a whole bunch of money to the SPCA. It's like it never happened, right? You can keep kicking as many dogs as you want as long as you keep writing those checks. That's a really vulgar analogy, but basically that's what carbon offsets are. An investigation was done into the world's largest carbon offset company, and it was found that upwards of 90% of the carbon offsets they sold were complete bogus. And when you think about it, it's an incredibly difficult thing to keep track of, because somebody might buy a carbon offset, they might go and plant a tree, but does that tree survive or does it die? Who actually knows? Not only are carbon offsets a scam because they remove any and all personal responsibility, which to me is a huge touchy point, that just pisses me off beyond belief. If you're gonna do something, then do it. If you claim you care about something, then back up your words with actions. That is my motto. But I think that they're also just incredibly insulting to the intelligence of the population. If you don't care about the environment, say so. Just go live your life, be wasteful, be an asshole, do what you want to do, but stop trying to pretend that you're something you're not. Stop trying to act like you're concerned about something you're not. We're not that stupid. Just do what you're gonna do and stop trying to be self-righteous about it. Carbon offsets are a scam. The next scam we're gonna talk about is a really big one. It's a really widespread one, and it is Canadian real estate. It is no secret that across the world, and in particular across North America, the cost of housing has gotten completely out of control in the last several decades. That is not unique to Canada, that is not unique to Toronto, that is a widespread issue. But in Canada in particular, and even more so in the metropolitan areas like Toronto and Vancouver, the cost of housing has soared at such a pace that it is completely unsustainable for everyone. There are a lot of directions that we can point the blame for this. We can talk about foreign investment, we can talk about zoning laws, we can talk about poor urban planning, we can talk about all sorts of different things that are creating the situation that we're in, but the bottom line is that Canadian real estate is extremely overvalued. Just for reference point, every year in Ontario here, we get a statement in the mail from a company called MPAC. MPAC is the company that assesses the property values and calculates the property taxes for the year. The value that my property is assessed at on my MPAC statement is about 50% of what it would actually sell for on the market. There are literal shacks in Toronto, okay? Actual uninhabitable, wasteland, condemned shacks that sell for $1 million or $2 million simply because the land is apparently worth that much.
It's awfully small.
I'd say it's awfully cozy.
That's dilapidated.
Rustic.
That house is on fire.
Motivated seller.
In fact, there's another creator I'm going to link to. I'll put his channel in the description box down below. He goes by Millennial Moron, and he does a series called Canadian Real Estate versus Literal European Castles, where he shows shacks in Canada that are selling for as much as like actual castles sell for in Europe. And it's wild to look at. It's amusing, but it's also like terrifying. Not only is our housing incredibly overinflated here, but the entire real estate industry in itself is a scam. The way that it is run, the way that it is operated, and the process of buying a house here is nothing short of a scam. For starters, we have blind bidding, which means that if you go and you place an offer on a property and there's a competing offer, you are not going to be told how much that competing offer is for. You don't know if it's a higher offer than yours, you don't know if it's a lower offer than yours. You'll be given an opportunity to improve your offer, to make a bigger offer, but for all you know, you could be voting against yourself. You could be competing with yourself, and that's actually something that I encountered when I bought this house. There was another offer on the table. I was told there was a second one, but I don't know if I had already beat out that offer or if I was lower than them or higher than them, and I made a higher offer even still, and for all I know, I could have just bid myself up for no reason, but I'll never find out. There's also a fee that you incur every time you buy a property called the land transfer tax, which as it sounds is a tax for simply transferring the land from one person to another. And it's not a small tax. It's based on the value of the property, it's based on the location of the property, it's based on a few different factors, but the land transfer tax when I bought this house was somewhere around $20,000. So that's a closing cost, it's a transaction cost that got me absolutely nothing, and that's poof, gone, I'll never see it again. And if I sell this house and I buy another one, I'll have to pay another $20,000 for no real reason. And then there's our mortgages, which are a whole nother can of worms. In the States, you guys can get a 30-year fixed mortgage where your rate is locked in and guaranteed for the next 30 years as long as you don't refinance or sell. Which means that if you bought a property a few years ago when rates were really low and you signed in at 1% or 2%, you can have that rate for the rest of your life basically if you stay where you are. But here in Canada, good frickin' luck. We have 5-year mortgage terms or less, which means that if you bought a property as I did, when interest rates were low, I signed on around 3% when I bought this house, but I only signed a 2-year term. The maximum that you can sign is a 5-year term. I signed a 2-year term, which means that in 2 years, coming up this summer now, I have to renew my mortgage. And that means I have to re-sign the mortgage at the current interest rates. So I've been paying like 3% for the last 2 years, but I'm gonna have to re-sign now at 5 or 6 or 7%, or I don't even know what percent. And now you might be asking, well, why didn't you just get a 5-year at least? Because if you break a fixed term mortgage, there are penalties. 5 figures of penalties. So if I got a 5-year fixed mortgage and I wanted to sell my house after 2 or 3 years, I would incur again another $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 in penalties for breaking that mortgage term. And when I bought this house, I wasn't totally sure if I was going to stay or go, and so I figured 2 years was a good starting point for me. But even if I had signed a 5-year term, at the end of that 5 years, I have to then go and renew at whatever the new interest rates are, whether they're higher or lower. On a macro scale, this has also really screwed up rent prices because a lot of investors snapped up properties when interest rates were at rock bottom prices, and they either got them on variable rates or even if they got them on fixed rates, they're coming due for renewal now. And of course, if their mortgage payments go up, they have to increase the cost of rent to make up for that. So in the area that I'm living in right now, a 1-bedroom basement apartment runs about $1,800 a month. Not even a nice apartment, a crappy, dark basement apartment with no natural light, $1,800 a month.
Please don't tell anyone how I live.
And you might be wondering, well, why doesn't the government step in? Why doesn't the government do something to make housing more affordable? We have an absolute housing crisis in this country. Why isn't the government helping? Well, there's a few reasons. On a personal level, a lot of our politicians are invested in real estate, and so they have no interest in trying to reel things in or to make moves that would lower the cost of housing because it just means that their investments would plummet. But even beyond that, a large percentage of our baby boomer population here has their entire real estate portfolio locked up in the value of their home. Essentially, a lot of people have not saved for retirement over the years, and all they have now, if they're lucky, is a paid off home that they bought 30 or 40 years ago, which they're then going to have to sell and liquidate, either downsize or go to renting or do something to get the equity out of that home to retire on. If the government made moves all of a sudden that significantly decreased the value of properties here, a whole bunch of baby boomers would essentially lose their retirement funds and would be destitute. And then they'd be looking for social services, which we also don't have the ability to sufficiently offer them. And so rather than bankrupting an entire generation who's on the brink of retirement, and rather than causing their personal investments to plummet, politicians are doing basically nothing. I think another thing that a lot of Americans don't realize about Canada is that geographically we are very, very spread out. So like in the States, if you live somewhere that's a high cost of living city, theoretically you can drive an hour, 2 hours, maybe 3 hours away, and you can find another city where the cost of living is a lot more affordable. You'll still find work there, you'll still find good amenities, but we don't have that here at all. If you live in downtown Toronto and you drive 3 hours in any direction, you'll still be in Toronto. That's not even a joke. You'll be maybe in the outskirts, you'll be in the suburbs, but you'll still be in Toronto. You'll still be in a place where the cost of living is insane, where housing is scarce. I've been thinking about making an entire video about the financial differences between living in Canada versus the States, and if that's something you want to see, drop me a comment down below and let me know, and I might just do that. But without getting too much into it, because realistically we could dig this apart for hours and hours, I will just say that Canadian real estate is extremely overvalued. The real estate industry is extremely predatory. It's basically run like a mob. I hate to say it. That's not even an exaggeration, it's true. And Canadian real estate as a whole is an absolute scam. It is not worth the money, but we really have nowhere else to go, so we're kind of screwed. Help, please. Now, speaking of government scams, we have to talk about something that is probably one of the longest running scams in human history, and that is the dairy industry. I have so much to say about this, I'm gonna try to stay focused here. For starters, I'm gonna pose this question to you, and you can drop your answers in the comments. Name one species other than humans that drinks milk past infancy. Oh wait. Yeah, there are none. We've all heard the campaigns, right? Got milk? Milk does the body good. Well, turns out it actually doesn't. Humans, just like every other mammal, have no biological need to drink milk past infancy. Milk is something that is produced as basically nature's baby formula. It is not meant for adults to be drinking. But back in World War I, governments started sending milk products overseas to their troops, and farmers realized that there was a huge business opportunity here. Many of them transitioned from growing crops or breeding animals for meat into dairy farms. So they started producing mass quantities of milk in an effort to make as much money as possible, but then the war ended, and all this milk was left over and nobody seemed to want it. There was no need for it anymore. So the government bought it all, paid the farmers, and decided they were going to convince the masses that it was a health product, that it was something that everybody should be drinking huge quantities of every day. And that's where these marketing campaigns originated. Before we knew it, we found dairy ingredients in basically everything, kids being force-fed milk with their lunches at school, and just very, very aggressive branding trying to convince us that this was something we needed in our diets, even though it definitely wasn't. And for reasons that don't really make any sense, this entire process has continued ever since. Oh wait, I know why. Money. Surprise. Here's the thing, before I asked you what other species drinks milk past infancy, here's another question. What other species drinks milk from another species? It's a really bizarre and kind of grotesque idea to even think about. The marketing that suggested that dairy products were good for us or that it was a necessary source of calcium were exactly just that. Just marketing. In fact, there are several very large, very well-researched studies that suggest that dairy consumption actually increases the risk of certain illnesses, things like breast cancer and osteoporosis, amongst others. And that's not even touching on the fact that upwards of 75% of the world's population is thought to be lactose intolerant. Lactose intolerance in itself is such a bizarre concept to me, right? It's like our bodies are not meant to drink cow's milk. And when we do, for some of us, it makes us sick. And then they give it a name, lactose intolerance. But imagine if we consumed anything else that was just like not meant to be human food. Like imagine if you just went outside and started eating a bunch of rocks and dirt and mud and it made you sick. And then you went to the doctor and the doctor was like, oh, you must be dirt intolerant. Like, no, idiot, you're just not supposed to be eating that shit. And even reaching beyond the fact that the marketing was all a lie and the health complications are very well documented, dairy production is extremely intensive on the environment and also extremely, extremely cruel for the cows. This is something that a lot of people don't recognize, but cows don't just produce milk. Like, take a moment to think about this. We are mammals, cows are mammals, lots of other animals are mammals. Think about what is required for a mammal such as ourselves to produce milk. It's not just something our bodies do. Bodies don't just produce milk. Mothers produce milk. Milk production is created during pregnancy. A lot of people, myself included, grew up believing that cows just make milk because they're cows, and it's actually not at all logical. Of course they don't.
Oh, yeah, right. He's a wonderful, magical animal.
In order for a cow to produce milk, she has to first become pregnant. And I'll just say that that process doesn't involve a romantic evening with a bull, but rather a farmer with a really, really long plastic glove. Then just like humans, cows have a 9-month gestation period where their baby grows inside of them, and they ultimately give birth. And naturally, that baby is born wanting to drink its mother's milk because that's what the milk is there for. It's baby formula for the cow. But what would happen if the baby cow drank the mother's milk? Oh yeah, the farmers couldn't sell it. And so what happens? Well, the farmer has to remove the calf from the mother so that the calf doesn't drink all the milk that the farmer wants to sell. And they do that almost immediately after the calf is born. And the mom becomes so distressed, she screams and she cries and she chases after the tractor because all she wants is her baby who's being stolen from her. Then she's hooked up to a machine which takes all of the milk that her body produced for her baby, and that milk of course gets sold, and they keep doing this until she dries up. And once her milk supply dries up, they breed her again and start the process all over again. And as for the calf, well, it depends. If the calf is female, she'll be put into a little shed where she can live, and she'll be all grown up and eventually turned into a dairy cow herself, where she will be impregnated, her babies will be stolen, her milk will be sold, and the process again will repeat. But if the calf is male, then of course he's never gonna produce milk, which means he's kind of unwanted, he's unnecessary on the farm. In some cases, that means he's just gonna be killed and discarded like garbage. In other cases, they'll let him grow a little bit bigger and then they will slaughter him for veal. And as for the female cows, the dairy cows, well, they will be bred over and over again, producing as much milk as possible, having their babies stolen over and over again. And when they're no longer profitable, when they're too old to breed or they no longer produce enough milk, they will also be slaughtered. So just to recap, we're committing atrocities to these animals. We're abusing them, we're using them, we're exploiting them, and ultimately killing them to produce a product that actually does our bodies harm, that we never ever needed in the first place, and that is completely destroying the environment based on its land usage and its water usage required to produce it. For what reason? Yeah, there is none. And the part that is the most bizarre to me of all is that people have this unreasonable, irrational fear of alternatives, of dairy alternatives. People go, oh my god, soy has estrogen in it. Oh, it's gonna kill me, it's gonna give me man boobies. First of all, soy products have actually been shown to reduce the risk of cancers, those same cancers that dairy products seem to increase the risk of. But beyond that, soy products have something in them called phytoestrogen. Phyto refers to something that comes from a plant and that only affects other plants. So unless you are a plant, phytoestrogen has no effect on your body. But I wonder if there is something that we consume that actually has mammal estrogen in it, something that could actually harm our bodies, something that actually affects our hormone balance. Like, I don't know, the breast milk from a recently pregnant mammal like a cow, which is just raging in estrogen. Oh my god, people are not very smart. I'm losing faith in humanity. No, I'm just kidding, I never had any to begin with. But with that said, let's talk about the last scam on today's list, and that is fast fashion. I feel like this is a little bit lighter. It's still a really heavy topic, but at least it's a little bit lighter than the last couple. Fast fashion, easy one to talk about, right? No, not really. Fast fashion is a huge scam, and it is a huge problem. We all know about the environmental aspect of it, we all know about the labor violations of it, but what makes it a scam beyond that? Well, it's a scam for the consumer at the end of the day as much as it is for everybody else in the production line. In recent years, it feels like almost every company, even those that used to make good quality clothing, have switched to more of a fast fashion business model. Fast fashion is poor quality, cheap clothing, and most of the time it is produced in countries with almost non-existent labor laws. The people who make the clothing are often exposed to really harmful chemicals and things that are used to dye and treat the fabrics. And those garments then get shipped across the world and sold to people like you and me in basically every store and every single mall. There are definitely some companies that are a lot worse for this than others. The ones that come to mind off the top of my head would be things like H&M, Shein, Forever 21, Zara, places where the clothing is particularly terrible quality. But realistically, almost every store in the mall nowadays is fast fashion, and it's actually become very, very difficult to find a brand or a piece or a garment that isn't. The average fast fashion garment gets worn less than 10 times before it gets donated. But when it gets donated, nobody actually wants it because so much of it is being produced, it's being shipped off to third world countries, and they don't even know what to do with it, and they're becoming overrun with these textile wastes. But even on our end, we're getting scammed because if you walk into a store and you find a shirt and that shirt is only like $8, you might think it's a wonderful deal, it's a great deal. Okay, fine, it's not going to be great quality, but it's only $8. But if you only get a few wears out of that piece before you get rid of it, then you're just gonna have to go rebuy it again and again and again, as opposed to a higher quality item, which could actually last you significantly longer and cost you far less per wear. When I was a kid, a store like The Gap, for example, was known for being good quality. In fact, it was actually outside of the scope of what was financially accessible to me at that point in my life, but I knew that if somebody gifted me a Gap sweater for my birthday, it was going to be really high quality, it was going to wash and wear beautifully, and it was going to last me a really long time. As I got a little bit older and I started making my own money, I often chose to shop at The Gap. And I did so for many years, and at first I got that same high quality I was used to, but over time I started to notice the quality diminishing significantly and very fast. And eventually I found myself sitting on this pile of clothing that I had accumulated over the span of maybe a year or two, hundreds and hundreds of dollars, maybe even a couple $1,000s worth of clothing that I had worn one time, possibly two times, but the very first time that I went to wash it and wear it again, I couldn't, because it either shrunk significantly or stretched out of shape all weirdly. I found in particular that the tops that I bought would get shorter and wider and then they just didn't fit at all. They were terrible quality and it was an absolute waste of resources and a huge waste of money, and I was pissed. So I emailed The Gap and I was like, guys, what is going on? This is not what I expect. This is not what I'm used to from you. What is with all of this? I've spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars and it's all trash. And they responded, they're like, oh, we're so sorry to hear that. Here's a $20 gift card. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with a $20 gift card? But yeah, that's all that they could do for me apparently. And of course, this is not unique to just The Gap. This is widespread. Nearly every brand of clothing that used to be considered good quality no longer is. And the few that are, the few that still make high quality pieces and make them ethically, are generally unaffordable to the average consumer, myself included. So what do? What's the solution? I think that the best possible thing we can do is try to be a little bit choosy, try to be a little bit picky. If there's a piece of clothing that we know is going to get a lot of wear and tear and we really need it to be sturdy, just try to invest a little bit more into that particular piece. And know that if you are buying fast fashion, it's not going to give you a good bang for your buck, but just know that you are getting scammed. Much like the dairy industry, fast fashion is yet again another industry whose existence benefits nobody but the corporations who are raking in all the money at the top. The workers get exploited, the consumers get ripped off, and as always, the environment gets devastated in the process. Sunshine and rainbows and lollipops. Was this video a bummer? Sorry if I bummed you guys out, I hate to say it, but real life can be a bummer at times, and I think the best thing we can do is just be knowledgeable and make better choices with the information we have available to us. As always, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts and opinions on everything we've discussed in this video, so drop me a comment down below and let me know. And also let me know if you actually want to see a part 10 of the series. I might have one more in me, but you guys have to tell me if you're interested in that.
Well, stop beating this dead horse when it stops spitting out money.
If you enjoyed this video at all, please go ahead and hit that like button. Feel free to subscribe if you haven't done so yet. You can follow me on Instagram at according_to_Nicole. Other than that, thank you guys so much as always for watching. Take care. Try not to be too bummed out, and I'll see you next week.